everyone. Welcome to this episode of Ask a Therapist with me, your host, Joy Schwartz, MBA, MA, and LPC intern supervised by Ken Johnson, PhD. This is the last episode in our series focused on work-related challenges. And on Ask a Therapist, I tackle common counseling challenges in the moment, and over time, we'll tackle counseling questions that arise in the moment from our viewing audience. This week's episode is, I have a difficult boss, what should I do? And I was having a casual conversation with my husband about this particular topic, and he unquestionably validated having a boss who's a jerk is the most difficult thing people have to encounter at work that could adversely affect their mental health. So, true disclaimer: this is only an anecdotal claim, but we had a good laugh about it, and especially when I asked him, well, if this is the most difficult challenge, what should people do? And he said, well, quit, obviously. And we had a good laugh over it, but in reality, it's just not that simple. So if this is something that's plaguing you, if you think your boss is a jerk, or you just have a difficult boss and you're not sure what to do, there are really 4 checks I would recommend performing. So here are the 4 steps you might want to take, or 4 checks you might want to perform when assessing your boss and determining if you really do need to leave the organization or take a different path. So those 4 steps are, and again, before we get there, for those of you just joining, this is Ask a Therapist with your host, Joy Schwartz. And this episode is I have a difficult boss, what should I do? So again, those 4 steps you might want to take to assess your boss and your current situation are: 1, check yourself; 2, check your boss; 3, check for toxicity; and 4, check the organization. So let's go back to number 1, which is check yourself. So this is an opportunity for you to reflect on whether or not you might actually be part of the problem. And what I mean by that is, could you better manage up? Do you have something personal going on, or has something impacted your performance recently, or something going on in your personal life that you may need to address that could potentially be impacting your boss's perception of you? Or maybe you've been too rigid, and maybe you've just been too set in your ways. Or maybe it's the opposite, where you've been playing things a little bit too fast and loose, and it could be time to get things on the straight and narrow. Either way, it could be an opportunity to re-clarify your boss's expectations and then develop a plan so that you can exceed those expectations. Either way, when it's related to you, it's a good opportunity to get an objective point of view and some perspective from someone you trust at work, or potentially a career coach. And that second question, so again, the first one was check yourself. The second one is to check your boss. So maybe your boss has something personal going on that he or she needs to address. Or is it possible that your boss is dealing with some really difficult situations related to the organizational hierarchy? And now, to be honest, those are the sorts of things that your boss should be shielding you from. But in reality, if you are that close to if you're that close to the sun in your organization, meaning you're so close to the top that maybe have some insight into what he or she is going through, perhaps you can cut your boss a little bit of slack while they're working through those issues, especially if it's not a common occurrence. And then sometimes it's just stylistic differences. So you and your boss may have totally different communication styles, or totally different styles and ways of getting work done. Or it could just be something personality related. And in those situations, I would unquestionably recommend going out for happy hour or lunch with your boss, maybe just to kind of clear the air and to align on what some of those differences are and see if you can work your way past them. And then, even just to simplify things a bit, it could be something like, approaching your boss and saying, I think our work relationship could be improved somewhat. Maybe we could just push the reset button. So your situation best and whether or not something like that might work. But those are just some tips if you think, there's some things related to your boss that may be situational, or that you may have the ability to impact. So that's number 1, check yourself. And then number 2, check your boss. Number 3 is to check for toxicity. So if you think that you can diagnose your boss with something in the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and you want to go ahead and play therapist at work to try to impact your situation, I wouldn't recommend that by any means. And for those who aren't as familiar, we refer to that as the DSM. So if you think you can diagnose your boss with something in the DSM, which I unquestionably don't recommend as a therapist, there may be something to look at there, and that could be a real cause for concern. but maybe there's something behind it. And everyone, we all know what our tolerance is for work-related or boss-related stress. Only you know how much you can tolerate. And if you think it's not that bad and your threshold is pretty high, then maybe you can put up with it for a while. But if you think it's too much and you think you might need to move on, and it's just too much to handle, then that's something to be aware of as well. And it may be time to look elsewhere within the organization or beyond. And that kind of gets us to that check number 4. So you've checked yourself, you've checked your boss, you've checked for toxicity, and you're like, all right, let's perform one more check and see if there may be some other places in the organization that I might be a fit. If you love the organization, you love what you do, maybe there are other places where you can find a fit or find a home for yourself within the organization. But unquestionably, I wouldn't recommend going down that path until you've checked those other 3 sources, right? Yourself, your boss, and certainly assess the situation for toxicity within your boss or within your team. And the last thing on the checking the organization front that's really important is if you feel like if you have found another opportunity internally, then it's important to make sure that you understand the organization's protocols as it relates to internal promotions and lateral moves as well. Because in the event that the new role involves interaction with your current boss, you'll want to make sure you handle that really carefully. So those are our 4 steps. The checkers. So if at the end of the day you say to yourself, I've checked myself and I don't necessarily need to change to impact my situation. I've checked my boss and he or she doesn't have anything wrong with them from a mental standpoint or a health standpoint, but he or she just can't lead or can't give me what I need. If you've checked for toxicity and everything seems, or you realize that the organization and the toxicity or the bureaucracy are just too much to tolerate, and then you've checked the organization and your prospects for other opportunities internally are pretty weak, then it may be time to move on. But before you move on, or as you're even working through those various stages of the assessment process, then I think it can be really valuable to connect with a trusted colleague or mentor internally, or an internal or external career coach or counselor. So that's our episode for today on Ask a Therapist. Thank you so much for joining, and I would encourage you to visit the blog post related to this topic at my website, www.joyschwartz.com. And I also encourage you to follow me on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and even on my YouTube channel to check out these videos to join the conversation on work and life transitions and good mental health. See you in the next episode of Ask a Therapist, and have a great week.